Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
We've talked around that. So let's talk about energy. What do we have by way of energy? If we are looking at distributing and reducing our consumption, we need to first know what are we consuming, what are we using for our energy source, so that we can know where to cut. So what we want to do is examine our energy budget. How much are we producing? What type of energy are we producing? How much are we consuming and what type of energy are we consuming? How much are we generating? Which sectors are we generating more from? And that's a country to country calculation, state to state calculation. That's something that will need to be done for energy, the energy budget of a country, of a location, the consumption and emissions, the type of activity that we are trying to pursue, and with that, then we allocate responsibility and charge. Who does what, right? Okay, so these are data, and usually I have, if I'm showing graphs like this, I show you where the data are coming from. So these are US production of energy from 1950 onwards. We have starting with coal, natural gas, crude oil, gas liquids, nuclear, I think that's nuclear, yes, nuclear, and that's renewable. So this is the production in energy in the US from 1950, the last 70 years. And as you can see, it's mainly stayed constant. Out here we have an increase based on increased consumption, increased demand. We go out here, nothing really changes much, but at some point we get in a very large increase in the gas and oil production. That coincides with the fracking of shale reservoirs in the US. That made a very big difference. Together with that comes the closing of coal-fired power plants. So I think that's the answer we have to the reduced emissions, because we were cutting down on coal-fired power plants. Those are by far the largest emitters, and so if we start shutting them down, you see a change in the emissions. If you're producing natural gas, a lot of times you will have condensate and lighter oils with it. That's almost like gas. So you produce them, you separate them out as liquids and gas. So all of these, coal, natural gas, crude oil, NGPL, these are all fossil fuels, right? So if you look at this one here, that's the major component of energy in the US. So when we are talking about cutting down on energy consumption, closing out certain parts of this energy mix, this is really what we're looking at. So this is natural gas, this is oil, and this coincides a lot with the fracking boom. Shale plays came into picture here. So we started fracking, we got better at it, we finally realized this is how we're going to do it, and that unlocked a large amount of oil and gas, both oil and gas. So that's really in here. If you go further back, you'll see a dip, oil and gas, when the oil embargo came in 1970. So that is, it should be here. Should be out here, and that's pretty much what we're looking at, that thing out here. It's heavily smooth. So if you look at raw data, you'll see that dip coming in, where US started saying, okay, we need to go back to finding our own oil. We can't rely on Saudi Arabia. I was in Iceland looking at geothermal energy sources. In Iceland said the 1970 was a big rude awakening for them because they're a small island. All of their energy for heating and everything came at that time from oil and gas. When the oil embargo happened, the government they took a loan, World Bank loan, and started developing their own geothermal energy. They went from 1970 being one of the poorest countries in Europe to being a thriving economy today. So each country has its own decisions to make, has its own changes that it needs to bring about. This is for the US. What does it look like for India? In today's time, coal, yes. So, and I think I have slides where coal is by far about 60-70% of the energy mix. So if we're looking at energy emissions control and emissions reduction, that's a very simple step to take. It allows tweaking contributions. It allows making some changes. Now, those changes are not easy. In Colorado, the place where we will be drilling our first well for CCS, there is a coal-fired power plant that will be shut down. That is already being shut down. So there is a lot of anxiety in the region because there is revenue that is made from the coal-fired power plant. There are jobs that are there. The power plant pays taxes that go into the local economy. In US, the local taxes pay for schools. So if this major company is gone, the schools stand to suffer. There will be no revenue to have good schools. There will be no people to have who will have jobs in the area. So there is a price to pay that every country has to manage on its own. If you have coal in 80% of the mix or 60% of the mix, and you start cutting it down, where will the people find employment? Right? Those are plans that have to be made. Those are not decisions only. Those are plans that take years to come about. You need a trained workforce, people who will be able to transition from working at a coal plant to working at another type of refinery or in solar energy or in geothermal or in nuclear. It's not as easy as taking someone, moving them from one job to the other. Those are country plans that need to be made. If we don't make them, if we have not made them yesterday, then our goals are delayed until such time that we can train people. We talked about production, not consumption. Together with production, we also need to look at consumption. We can produce energy, but what are we consuming ourselves? So this is what US consumption looks like. Again, the same color scheme, coal out here, natural gas, oil, nuclear, and renewables. So the challenge what we have is a couple of things. One is, if we expect energy transition to happen away from fossil fuels, we need to change this picture. Right now, 80%, 75 to 80% of US consumption is fossil fuels. The mix has changed, coal has gone down, but that's been made up by natural gas. The oil production has gone up steadily and now it's more of a steady state, but there is no reduction. Nuclear has increased from the 1970s, 80s, but now, as you can see, it's more or less constant. The increase that needs to happen in these two parts, in the nuclear and in renewable energy, this is everything combined, wind, solar, geothermal, every part of renewable energy is contained in this little segment. It's about less than 5% of the mix. You add nuclear to it, it's maybe 10-15%. That's about it. So there are challenges that US needs to meet to be able to go through with the energy transition and move away from fossil fuel reliance. We can look at the data a little bit differently. These are US energy exports and imports, or net imports actually. So here we have crude oil. This is the oil embargo, and out here is the increase, and the imports started reducing out here sometime after in 2007, 2008. Similarly, natural gas, the imports have reduced quite a bit. Petroleum products gone down again, same picture. And coke and coal has gone down a little bit, but I would say this is normal fluctuation. So the imports have remained at steady state for coal. Everything else has reduced. We can take this entire thing and compare it. So now what we're looking at are two sets of graphs, consumption and production up here, imports and exports. So the result of the fracking that started coming about somewhere around 2008, 2009, 2010, this is when the whole industry was booming. Production increased substantially, enough to surpass consumption. And so somewhere around 2018, 2020, US became a net exporter of energy. Production in red is more than consumption in blue. And you see that on the export-import data, same thing. So if we are to do something like this, we need data, not only data to tell us what the source of energy is, but also how much are we consuming, what are we exporting, what are we importing. Right? So this is the type of information that we need to compile if we are planning to make a difference, if we are planning to go through with energy transition. If you take the observations, just compile them, put them all together, then we have the net exporter, energy exporter status for US since about 2019. In 2023, I don't know what the numbers will be for this year, but in 2023, US energy exports were the highest on record. So this poses a conundrum, because we are looking at reducing emissions. And you have your nationally declared goals, and we are all working towards emissions control, and yet we are exporting energy to other countries to burn. Right? So this brings a very interesting question. And what I'm finding now, at this point in my career, is really exciting, because it's not just science and technology anymore for us. Everything we do has a question of sustainability, has a question of equity in it. So for me, what it seems like is we've moved away from selfish science for the sake of science. It's burning curiosity. It's fascinating. Really, I want to do this because it consumes me. I need to understand the system. That's a luxury that I feel we cannot enjoy today. If we're doing something, we need to have some effort that is devoted towards solving a problem that we will need to confront at some point or the other. What we've also seen is that the energy consumption in the US has been reducing, which that is a good sign. It's becoming either more efficient, and that is a big effort, because energy efficiency is a major part of wastage or lack of efficiency. So there have been efforts in the US to make factories, to make buildings, to make everything more efficient, energy efficient. So you have what's called LEED certification, that is how energy neutral is the new building that you're constructing, and you can get, those are bragging points and some subsidies that the owners of buildings can expect to get from the government. So there are incentives in place to have more efficient constructions, to have more efficient factories. The type of energy being consumed has changed. Very specifically, coal. Coal has now reached a public understanding to say we maybe want to go away from coal. It's been on the election ballots, on discussion points where states that are traditionally coal producing have been lobbying to be able to produce coal further, and political parties are catering to either allowing them for, in exchange for something else. It's become a bartering chip for discussions and for concessions to states that are coal producers. This will happen here as well. You have major coal production areas that rely on being able to produce coal. We, just as an aside, we made dust sensors to measure the amount, just the amount of PM2.5 in the atmosphere, and we brought it to India and traveled with it wherever we were going, and made a trip by road from Kolkata to Dhanbad. And we measured along the way. We just held the sensor out of the car that was taking us, and we just measured along the way. And we reached Dhanbad, we plotted up the data, came back to Kolkata and plotted up the data again. And it so happened that we went there in the morning, and when we returned 2 days later, it was nighttime. And so the data were very interesting, because during the daytime, the emissions, the particle, the PM2.5 were lower than what they were in the night. That's a problem, because during the day you think there are the power plants are running, the factories are running, everything is happening in the day, and so there should be higher particulate matter in the air. And in the night, when factories are all closed, they should be lower. But it was exactly the opposite. So we asked around, so why is this? What's going on? Why do you have higher particulate matter in the air in the night? And our host in Dhanbad said, well, in the night, the control agencies go to sleep. So everything's being released to the atmosphere. It's been flared or just vented, right? So those are some of the real challenges which we will face on trying to make everyone be, first of all, compliant with existing rules, and then make the rules more stringent. If you think that that's only happening in India, that's not true. We have reports in oil fields where you're not allowed to flare. In the US, it's not allowed, if you have gases, to flare as a way of getting rid of excess gas. You have to account for it. So in oil and gas, in oil fields, you always produce some gas with it. If you're producing a lot of gas, you have to have the facility in place to capture the gas and do something with it. You cannot flare it. In many countries, you can flare, which means you're producing oil, that's lucrative, you want to sell that, you can bring it to the market and that's sold. Gas that's produced is too low of a price. You can't sell it for a profit. It costs much more to strip the gas, collect it up and bring it to market. So most places will flare it. That means they will burn it, which means all of the emissions that come from burning gas are being just put out in the atmosphere without even the energy used for it. In the US, it's not allowed to do that. Only as a safety measure, if your pressure gets too much for gas and you have not accounted for it, to release pressure so that it's not dangerous, you can flare. You will be surprised how many places have dangerous levels of pressure that they need to flare. Right? So the thing which I'm trying to get across is that sometimes numbers give you what's the cold facts of what's happening, and you need to understand the story behind it, what's driving those numbers. And oftentimes it will be hard market decisions more than technical. So if we are going to decarbonize the energy sector, right, we ascribe most of the emissions, and we'll come to where we are getting the emissions from in more detail, but we have the energy sector that we look at. Fossil fuel production, we had it in the previous graphs, 85% because the total is 100 QBTU. So 85 QBTU comes from fossil fuels. And so if we want to cut it down by about 40 QBTU by 2050, right? That's a goal that has been mentioned by many states, that has been mentioned by the US. It might change with the new government, but for now that's the goal. So if that is going to happen, we can think of implications and opportunities. This is true for US. For the state that you are looking at, or for India, if you're looking at India as a whole, this will be a different, maybe similar, maybe different set of challenges. If I'm in the government, I will be looking at all of these to try and plan and have that as part of my economic plan to be able to get both the implications, to make sure if there is a job loss, then I have retraining opportunities for people to be trained to take other jobs. I will need to make sure we have enough investment to invest in the new form of energy that I'm coming up with. It can be anything, right? It can be solar. In the case of India, solar makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of nuclear energy that's been planned. That needs investment, government investment, or private investment, or as in the case of Iceland, World Bank investment, right? That has to be planned. That has to be gotten there. You'll need to regulate somehow the energy prices. You get rid of one type of energy, you bring in a new form of energy that's more insecure. People don't know much about it. Suddenly the energy prices spike. Before you know it, a major part of your population is unable to afford energy. And your grid will need to change. If you're going with renewables, there are fluctuations in the load. You'll have to make up for that, right? So there are enough opportunities. You might be developing new technologies, new ways to do things. All of those are marketable skills that we can have. There might be other things that we have not counted, but that will depend on on the way we look at things, the way we are designing our economy. So we took, this was with a couple of students, we went in and said, okay, let's compare Alaska with Hawaii. Two states, very similar in some ways, very different in other ways. Alaska is very cold. Hawaii is a tropical island. Both are away from the United States, the contiguous United States, which means everything has to be shipped or trucked into the state. And so if you look at Hawaii, energy source, geothermal. There are two volcanoes on one island. There is one dormant one on another island. So there is plenty of geothermal energy that is there. It is not being used at the moment. There are now plans to start getting more geothermal. It has a lot of sunshine. So solar energy is available freely. It's an island, Pacific island. There's a lot of wind. Wind energy is available, and there is a lot of tidal activity. So there is possibility of getting tidal energy. So there are different forms of energy that are available. There are opportunities in that for self-reliance, where to be able to have a workforce that is local because the energy source is local, right? So there are many things that allow the state to grow and to look for financial as well as other cultural advantages. There are challenges. And the challenges are the reliance. Right now, it's easy to use fossil energy, fossil fuels. A lot of Hawaii's life happens with fossil fuels. And so a switch to renewables means that you need some way to store that energy. We don't have that sort of a continuity of energy storage that would allow outages to be managed by stored energy. Alaska, similar state but very different mix. It has a lot of oil and gas. Major source of economy is oil and gas. And so if you say we're getting away from fossil fuels, you have a problem in Alaska. How do you manage that? But there is also an opportunity. Alaska also has a considerable amount of geothermal activity. It will allow technology to be grown in the state. At the moment, all of that work is done by imports, imported labor, imported knowledge. Nothing is happening inside the state, right? So there are quite a few opportunities that exist and challenges. So when we're looking to transition away from one way of living to another, these are some of the things that we will have to consider. So as you're being a legislator in your state, you will need to say, how are we going to manage it for my state? And you'll need data like these. You'll need data to say, where are we using energy? How much are we using? What are we bringing into the state? How much are we exporting? How much are we importing? Are we an importer or exporter of energy? Okay, so let's look a little bit more in detail of what the energy consumption is. This is data pulled in 2024, so not so long ago. We are in November, so about 6 months ago. The energy consumption is primarily petroleum, natural gas. Some of it nuclear, and then we have coal, and this is renewable energy, about 10%. In renewable energy, you have biomass energy, that's BECCS, and then you have wind, hydroelectric, and so on. So when we're looking at this and we see this sort of a graph, and we say we have a problem because we really are not managing this transition very well. We are geothermal. If you look at geothermal, we are investing heavily in geothermal. In the state where I live, Colorado, we have low-grade geothermal energy. We are creating opportunities and trying to win that, but it's not enough. We still are barely scratching the surface. We can go a little bit deeper in that and we can say, okay, so we have the source over here and we have the use on this side, right? So we can either cut the source. We can say, let's reduce everything over here. We reduce this by 10%, this one by 10%, but then we'll have to go through and say who will be affected here, because we need to get to who's consuming this energy. So these are the people we want to address. And now we have, and each one of these has numbers of how much of that petroleum that we are consuming, where is it going, who's consuming, who's the end user, right? So if we are going to make a case, then we need to go to transportation, for example. If this is the US, then the transportation is single cars. That means everyone drives their own car, not much carpools, and not much public transport. So if we are looking for energy transition, we will have to come up with schemes that allow us to change either all of them or some of them disproportionately more than the others, depending on what we can control and what we can change. That is not a trivial task, because each one of these has lobbies behind them. And I've seen the explosion of cars in India in the last 20 years, which tells me that the car lobby here has become very strong, much stronger than the train lobby used to be, because most people prefer to travel with their own cars today. I grew up in Mumbai. There's a very nice network of rail systems, light rails or near suburban train. Those suburban trains have not been upgraded and renewed, not to the extent that the city has grown. Cars have increased, I don't know how many fold. What surprised me also was that there is a new rule that none of the cars can be older than 20 years or something. And that's when they have to be put out of commission. I have a very well running car that's at least 25 years old. Runs well. I don't need it for much more. I don't need to get rid of a car in 20 years. So the question is, where do these rules come from? Why? Who do these rules benefit? They certainly don't benefit safety, because most of the cars 20 years old should be drivable. You have a Toyota that's meant to drive for over 100,000 miles. I have cars that I've driven with 200,000 miles. You can't do that in 20 years, right? So there are rules that are in place that are forcing consumption that's not justified. So the question that you ask is, who does it benefit and who does it hurt? Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Just because you want to save from COVID. So that accelerated more sales of car. Number one. Number two,
Yeah. Right. Yep. Yes. And you're right. So 3 points. COVID has increased because has increased the number of cars because of safety, because of health issues. The second one is economy. We've grown richer, so we don't want to go in buy cars because it's belongs to status. Right. There are other countries that have many cars, and the third one is safety. Right.
Getting developed, they are started buying the cars. In other countries, nations like US and Europe,
Yeah.
they already have many number of cars.
Right. Yes. So.
Where more danger than our country more danger.
Right. We'll have to decide, right? We'll have to decide. Do we want to go the US way, and every household has 2 cars or 3 cars, right? So that's the thing. Where which way do we want to go? The thing which is really interesting is the definition of what is affluence, right? Is it having 2 cars, and is it your definition, or is it taken by someone else, from someone else? Who's imposing that standard, the standard of living that we say, right? So that's the part which is very interesting for every. Right now, it doesn't feel to me that countries decide on their own. It is coming from some ideal of living standard that is imposed. It could be that we'll all come to the same conclusion and say, yes, indeed, I think for a proper way to live, I need 5 cars in my household because we have 6 or 7 people who are all working people and they go to different parts. They need to be transported. Sure. But that's not true of everyone, right? So that's the part which is going to be really interesting on how do we manage expectations and stimuli from outside that says, this is what you need to be happy. That's more on a philosophical state, but I think it's something that on this scale, which we will have to decide. Where are we going to cut? What can we do? And the other part is to say, maybe we don't want to do any of that because we have ways to mitigate. So we'll happily go, we'll keep doing this because we know that we can put something out here and we can capture all of the emissions that are happening in these sectors. Another way of looking at it. Another way of creating opportunity, because if you decide that these sectors are what we want to, sorry, I forgot, I was told to not, there's a pointer. I was told to not turn to the screen but use the mouse. So if we decide that this is where we want to cut in these 2 areas, this is where we want to cut emissions, then it gives an opportunity to develop technologies, to be able to reduce emissions. So you can work on MOFs, for example, as Prerna will tell you, or you can work on membranes, or you can work on mineralization, you can work on many other things that are ideal for local conditions. So if we are looking at emissions in the US, these should be from 2023. I thought I had that here. It doesn't list it out here, but this is from 2023. You have major emission sources: transportation, about 28%, agriculture, electric power, industry, and residential and commercial. That's the major use. Now, electric power really shouldn't be by itself because electric power is being distributed out here. So if you allocate that and you redistribute it, it doesn't change very much. So we come to about 30% for transport, about 30% for residential and commercial, and about 30%, 30, 30, and 30, all 3 of them. And then we have about 10% for agriculture. I was reading some reports. I might have those, I'm not so sure. Maybe I don't, because I don't understand the data quite as much. That said that in India, this one here is much larger because of the large amount of cattle that Indian farmers keep. And so the agricultural emissions come to, I think it was about 25-30%. So if we're going to change something, then we need to come back to this thing here and say we are going to change part of these, and this is how we will change it. We've been talking a lot about metric tons, million metric tons, and so on. This is just a breakdown of how we look at that and what the numbers mean, just to give you an idea. We are looking at million metric tons of carbon dioxide. For example, a small car is 1 metric ton. So we're looking at storing about 1 million metric cars per year, per project. That's really what's required here. And so when we talk about carbon dioxide, we're really talking about carbon dioxide equivalent. That's the warming potential reference to carbon dioxide. We take carbon dioxide as 1, and so then the global warming potential of methane is about 30 times as much. Nitrous oxide about 300 times as much. Because these are much less, so we say everything in relation to carbon dioxide. But part of it, the problem is now emerging, and that is methane. Methane emissions are increasing, at least in the US, by quite a bit. Some of it due to what's happening in the factories, what's happening in oil fields, but a lot of it from abandoned and old oil field wells that are leaking methane into the atmosphere. So there are large-scale satellite imaging, satellite measurements that are mapping old oil fields for their emissions in methane, and modeling that together with wind patterns to see where does that lead us to, where is it ending up in. Okay. If we, sorry, that looks messy. Hang on one sec. So if we look at the emissions from 1990 onwards until 2019 in the US, we have, oh no, sorry, this is global emissions. We have fossil fuels out here, about 60% of emissions from fossil fuels, carbon dioxide from land use about 11%, and methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. So that's pretty much the mix, and as you can see over time, that mix has not really changed very much, except for the fossil fuels that have gone up, carbon dioxide from fossil fuels that has gone up substantially. In 2020, we looked at these data in a slightly different manner. In 2020, this is the emissions by country. And so if you are United States or if you are EU, this is really how you want to show data, right? Because it puts China in a really bad light. It puts India as one of the emerging ones because this is being projected to increase, and China has already increased. And China is saying, wait a minute, no, hang on guys, this should be by per capita, or it should be as historic emissions. And the rest of the world is screaming and saying, no, wait a minute. These are, I don't know how many countries that are lumped together. Each one of them has a little tiny piece. So there is a whole thing of fairness and all this. And the reason I'm bringing up this point over and over again is because at some point we have to reconcile, we have to be able to say, what are we going to do? Okay, last topic for today. We divide up emissions in scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. Is that a concept? No? Okay, good. So, when people talk, or countries or companies talk about net zero, they usually mean scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Right now, scope 3 emissions are in a limbo because no one takes responsibility. When we talk about fossil fuels and emissions from fossil fuels, many of them fall in scope 3. Many of them are our responsibility, individual responsibility. Right? So if I'm just to briefly explain that, scope 1 emissions are direct emissions. I'm doing something and that's causing emissions. That's scope 1. Scope 2 is emissions that are caused because of what I do. I need something, so I'm building something, I'm going to buy things, and that the production of that part leads to emissions. So that's my scope 2 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are, I buy something and someone delivers it to me, they deliver it to me by truck or whatever. I have no control over it, and so that becomes a scope 3 emission. Or people who come and work for me in my factory drive, every one of them single cars, every one of them highly polluting cars. That's my scope 3, because I cannot tell them not to drive. I cannot tell them you have to take a public transport. But they're coming there just because they have a job in my company. Right? So we have these different scopes of emissions. When we talk about net zero and companies going net zero, these two are often what they talk about, because many companies say, we cannot control what you are doing in my company. That's your responsibility, right? So scope 3 emissions are by far the most difficult ones to control and the most difficult ones to manage. We can also look, I got into trouble with my school because I was teaching an undergraduate class, and I said, we do a lot of research in CCUS. How do you mitigate? What do you do? What are the different challenges? What are social aspects? What are technical aspects? And so on. But in doing that, we also consume energy and generate emissions. So I sent out the entire class. I had about 100 students. And so every week I would send them out to interview the different parts of the administration to say, what is the footprint of mines as an institution? What's our carbon footprint? How much are we consuming? How much are we emitting? I was told not to do that. Because that's not very popular, because we are doing so much in research to solve the problem, we cannot see that we are a problem ourselves, right? So it became a running joke, and I tell everyone who wants to hear that I was told to desist by my university. But any institution, and you can look at IIT Madras, right? You can investigate your own company, your own university, to say, what is my carbon footprint? Usually. And so I looked online, I said, okay, I'm sure I'm not the first person thinking of this. And sure enough, there's a paper by two people here that did that and said, okay, there is a carbon footprint of an institution, educational institutions. This is one of the few papers I found in this. And it said these are the major emission reasons. There's commuting out here, there's business travel, as you know, faculty travel everywhere to beg for money and to present papers to say, well, this is what we did with your money. There is commuting, there are people coming back and forth to the university. So that takes up a fair amount. Generation of waste out here, stationery consumption today, that might be going down because we don't do anything on stationery. And then we have vehicle fleet and electricity. If it's a new university, and as you can see over here, construction is really down. These are mature universities. New universities, that goes up substantially. So when we are looking at things for ourselves, doing an inward look, that's the part that we want to look at. And you can divide them up into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. The university, I travel for university business and I commute to get to work. The university cannot tell me, you will not come by car. They can give me free train passes and say, please, we hope you will use them, but they cannot control it. They cannot tell me, oh yeah, you're going to Chennai, that's fantastic, start swimming today, right? I have to take a plane. So I will come here by plane, and so that's scope 3 emissions for them. So there is a large amount of scope 3 emissions that universities generate. There's a large amount of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions that universities generate. And it's useful, it's a very useful exercise for all of you who are students to do that for IIT Madras, to see what is happening here on campus. I assure you, you will not be very popular with the management. If you go out and start asking questions like this, you better have a job, right? Because you might, I think KBR is over here, they will be interviewing people afterwards. And so you can go to them and say, look, I lost my job because I was in the same course as you were. And chances are they might also not be in jobs because they will be looking at KBR as emissions. So, but it is fascinating also to see how much open we are to changing the way we look at ourselves. For me, it was a very sobering experience. I knew I would not be very popular because we interviewed the vice president and the president of the university. We went to the president of research administration, all of these people who had high titles, and said, okay, tell us, what are you doing for carbon capture and storage? And they sat down to tell a big story. And students are, I'm more polite. Students are students. They're young. They have no fear. So they said, no, we don't want to know what you're doing for research. We want to know what you are doing for your office. How much is your office generating? But those are really the questions that we need to be asking. This is something we'll need to prepare for every university, every institution, every country, and the globe as such, all nations, to be able to solve the problem. Where are the consumptions coming from? And I think we will stop over here. Again, our world in data, I had promised you where you get these information from. Greenhouse gas emissions for country-wise, you can pull down data from here. Sometimes they have historic data, sometimes they don't. As if they do, it'll be here. Okay, so you can get all of that information out. You can also look at attributing emissions. If you pull down data for 5 different countries, let's say around, because as you heard Dorothy saying, it doesn't matter, it's not your emissions and my atmosphere, we all have the same atmosphere that we are breathing, then it doesn't matter which country you're looking at, we'll need to develop the plan together. How are you going to do that? Let's say you take the ASEAN nations, 5 countries, right? All joining each other, or all fighting like siblings always do. And so how are you going to reconcile emissions between the 5 countries that belong in the ASEAN nations? What are you going to do if your neighbors? We did this exercise for states. About 7 states, big ones, small ones, Hawaii, Rhode Island, Idaho, Colorado, Texas, Alaska, and South Carolina. This could be a representation of the world because there are very rich states. California should have been here, but very rich states, Texas, Alaska, maybe, maybe not. And you can see over here, this is the GDP, right? So we have GDP out here. Alaska, well, not really because they don't have that much. South Carolina, next bigger state, and Colorado. These are the rich states, and then there are other ones that are either poorer or medium level. Now, you take this and say, I'm a state senator of Texas, and I need to fight with my counterpart in Hawaii to reduce emissions, and we're going to do very democratically 10% everyone.
What is bio in this GDP?
Sorry?
A bio also.
Oh,
BIO.
billion dollars.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is $50 billion. Okay. And so if we're going 10% here, Hawaii is going to come in and say, no, hang on, that's way too much money for us. So if we are looking at reducing emissions, we need to look at each one of these plus more factors that come in to be able to do an equitable plan for CCS. Okay, I think we will stop here.